Oh yeah, welcome. Well, sir.
And
Yes,
good
sir.
morning, Katrina. Thank you for translating for us. Welcome to everyone online. We'll begin with some prayers as usual, but just make a note that the next two Mondays we will not have class because of the holiday and also because of conflict in the scheduling. So we will put that in the chat box. We'll skip 2 Mondays and we'll resume again. I'm sorry, I don't have the date in my mind, but we'll resume in 3 weeks. So now we'll begin with some prayers. The link for those prayers is in the chat box.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, full destroyer, completely and fully awakened, one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, nor the world's supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods, and whom is you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When I was supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paced 7 strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With your body's form supremely fine, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the 3 worlds, winner the best, supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the 3 worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate, protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower realms. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. The holy field endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, a flame in a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit may sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the four faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewed Mount Meru, 4 lands, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure land. Venerable holy gurus, in the space of your truth body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Ramna Mandalakam Niryatayami. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Oh, oh yeah, benar kaya gua. So. Oh, ini betul. Uma juga kau serba, pada dawa coba uma juga les. Kanji rawa juga tuh pas. getting diri ta zimbar mechinas. Yansar long shaman jurwa tele chine kange long jurus. Chesung batars ra. Kange rawan juche tune bas. Ngarazu tanda tewa jadan jorwa chut sang milu top de ora. O ti undisa tanda ngarazu sangma nyawa yeda tundula soba ngesung nele tarne. Ane lada mi kewa lanche. Te ane mi ba. Dewa gedan jobra chusang te chuji milu top de ore sera. Ti tobe kab de la sora. Kanze rawan jujins. Susu kewa chima penje. Yang dewa kawan roma juda. Sendilia sembala soba tuzu tema dili soba o tuzu kangalia. Susu samlo tane. Gyudi tumde susu le tanda tube rang yore sungara. Kange ches tade kab dila. Kanze rawan jujins. Tune baase. Susu le rawa yuwa maase ye ki kuriyu sangmate ya susu rawa yuwa nasi lega che tila timbari mato tilin ke yenda parche da tili chingi ke wa mara. Se kanzi rawa ju chi tune baase. Ketin diri da zimbar meche na se wara. O dinde negab dili ya. Da yang ja kiwa chima nyawa yeda tandrul ma nge song le talo ma jeba che se wara. Talo jamba goche ma turdu samu goche. Ya kyab tuwa lada mi kewa panche ko kyuma cheba ta ma tendo roma goya chi sogu resi wada. Keten diri ta ane yawa ida tendo la soba laya chilo cheme kuba tendo tarwa chebo resi. Jigu resi ranga kyab kures mama resi ya rimbiya resi. Keten diri ta zimban meche nas. Yansa loya shawan jojo rasi. Ta yansa tabi nyeson le ma yangja chilong so nasi wada. Yansa loya esi. Ani xiangwa de dongye nyao de kore ma to chige, ani shenda ke chu da chig samlu tanya da shida ke yo ma ra, yang sa lo xiangwa jo jo was, nye son do kye ne, ani dongye ki xiangwa do kyu ne, de yin na si wo ra, yang son lo xiang jo, de le chi ne kang ke lo ma jo, o tinte kub chi le lep su na, ni ta su ya kyab tu kure se le, da che ke yo ma ra, nyang ze te re, yang kya ma ndo ya ke, ti che ma do yo ma re se da, tele chini kange longa jus suya kemya long to gure singa sona ma jus o tinde sungdo o dish ya o
So here, as the great master Chandrakirti has stated in his entry to the middle way, excuse me, that while we have this kind of freedom and all of the conducive conditions, if we fail to take advantage of this situation and we are to fall into the abyss of the lower realms, then how will we possibly get ourselves out of that? So right now we have this situation of autonomy. We have all of the kind of freedom that comes with not having been born in the lower realms as a hell being, a hungry ghost, or an animal. And we have all of the kinds of conducive conditions. So we're not just born as a human. We have the freedoms or leisures as well as the endowments, the kind of good conditions to be able to practice. And so where we will go in the future in terms of a good or a bad rebirth, this is something that we are able to contemplate, and we have the kind of autonomy to make the choices about what causes we create as far as our future rebirth. We don't have some kind of situation where we are lacking the ability or where we have obstacles that prevent us from being able to create those kinds of causes. And so at this time, right now, while we have this sort of situation, we need to make an effort that we don't go downward, that we don't fall into the lower realms as a hell being, a hungry ghost, an animal, but instead continue to gain a good rebirth as a human or a god, sequentially again and again, gain that rebirth in order to be able to proceed towards definite freedom. And so we need to be our own refuge. We need to protect ourselves at this time by taking the necessary kinds of actions to ensure that we gain such a rebirth, that we don't fall into that abyss of the lower realms, where basically we're in a situation that lacks freedom because we are under the control of our suffering. We really can't do anything. We can't look to anyone to protect us or to be our refuge. We're just subject to being miserable, to enduring that kind of suffering, and we don't have the ability to create the causes that will lead us to get out of that. We will just continue to go down and down, to be stuck in that kind of abyss of the lower realms.
o ya o ti indi ta so de de sam sha wa number sanje ba lu chebe na Ngobo kande shi na ko debu di ya kyo la kyuji ko yora. Kyudan kyen le tene ke wor ma to kyujin kan megen chi lubur to chi yong chi yo ma re. Kyu me ben debu ke yo ma. Kyu me ne debu chi ne ya ga chi ke na ta ba re ka ba ne ke cho ro shin do de chi na ko kyu me go ni chi ge ne am ge tong bo de chi na ka sa ka le sa yu sa de tam yu sa ka sa ka ke cho ra. Sa ko ti kyu me ne ni ke ne 가 하자 타루라 강 같은 야가도 누가 상마 탐제 초실 있게는 탐제를 있게 공개 요 미칠 또 부전 탐제를 또 부용게 차루라 교단 게 메고 용게나 근데 그 뭐뭐 관계지나 대화 동에 뒤두기 시 가리나야 요 뒤생이나 저 메도이나 저 강거야 규정이 봐도 고야라 정가라서 교와 치마 양이 가르도 로만도 따야 될 소소 규칙 고야라 교대 현대적인 왕세는 만들어야지 남북해는 게 말아. 현대적인 왕세는 들어있네. 소소 마음에 뒤도 중요해. 뒤도야 교대 현대적인 라고는 대한 것이 무엇이더라. 양가에는 저와 연계시는 강가 야구 시행도 그라. 강가 야구 땅그림 마도 두 당신 말아. 저 맹게지는 양가시 무엇이더라. 네 딱가와 같은 데는 가시더라. 서메트를 뒤에 소소 디도기 교대 소소를 예고를 마도 재미든 신다 지리는 만들라 어디에도 소소래 기딜 때네 저 상에던 제부 디도니도 용거래서 봐라 랜데 배 계신 붙이고 와라 랜단 제부세 어디에도 소소래 개와야 붙인 사부네 대 제부대 하담비다 대화 상마 용거라 소소 메게 레사바네 마두르 마도 केवल ऐसा अनुमान दूर से मिगे ऐसा या रहे हो माने मिथुन बेचू से रहा तुम बेचू को रहा तुम बेचू को रहा और ते सुना सोसो या राले ते समसांगे संगे की ताबरे सुंगे रहा तंगी तागन गए इंदे शेने सुशिन गंदे जोर से तो तंगी तागन गए इंदे शेने सुशिन गंदे जो ले तंगे बच्चे बोले तंगी तागन पाबो सोसो सोसो 야가 치고 있다 두고 치고 있다 춘지셔서 내 단도 마음 봐 야부 영에 주사고도 단도 걸어 저기도 삼라라 두고 쳐도 삼도 대소소소 따고 와라 뭐 근데 전에는 랑도리 내대 야부 치고라 뒤질람 아마 돼서
So here, the main thing that we should keep in our minds is, according to Buddhism, whatever thing it is dependent upon causes and conditions. Nothing arises without a cause. And so therefore, if things could just like spring up without any kind of cause, then for example, like a fruit tree, like a mango tree, it wouldn't need to come in somewhere that is warm. It could arise anywhere, like even in a cold place at any sort of time. It would bear fruit whenever. But that's not how it is. It's not as though we can create or any sort of effect comes about without the proper sort of causes. If it were the case that harm came to us without any sort of cause, if it were just sort of capricious, then we would experience harm even without having created the causes for that. So whatever sort of thing it is, whether we are talking about our future rebirths or material things like atoms and flowers and so forth, is dependent upon a particular cause. So the kind of good or bad rebirths that we will have in the future are really dependent upon the causes that we ourselves create, the karmas that we create. It's not as though we are under the control of another. I mean, that would be a really kind of dangerous and scary situation. I guess if they were a loving sort of being, then why wouldn't it be that all beings were experiencing good, that we're just given good by this kind of loving being? But if they were not loving, then that would be really scary, right? If they were just giving us harm and giving us bad circumstances. But really, we need to recognize that our rebirths, what we experience in terms of our future suffering and happiness, is in our own hands. It is dependent upon the virtuous or non-virtuous causes that we create, because effects accord with their causes. A virtuous cause will lead to a good result. It can never be the case that doing something non-virtuous, a negative kind of a cause, can lead lead to a good result. So in addition to asserting that all phenomena arise from causes and conditions, they also arise from causes that are according, that are in harmony, in that an effect is going to be like the kind of cause that created it. And so, as the Buddha famously said, I am my own master and protector. No one else can do that for me. As far as the good and bad that I do, I am my own witness to that. So we need to be the ones that are paying attention. It is in our hands what kind of rebirth we will experience in the future, because we are the ones that are creating the karmas, creating the kind of causes that will lead to our future happiness and suffering and the kind of rebirth that we take.
야, 쟤도 넘버 산지 박에고 겹탑도 켈랭그래. 텔레소 몰람 답기 요래. 이나 산지 좀 된데 송구도. 디강가 저랑 제셔로 지스 바르와 주네. 몰람 겹네 가 야고요. 디강가 저랑 나셔로 지스 몰람 잡이요 말에. 소소 규지사. 규딜레 때네 텐데 요쇼스 몰람 됐죠. 그런 순간에 신경 텐데 제토스 다를 빼하고 조소 삼 소소소소 제수이라. 이제 마스는 순간에 좀 마서서 뭔다 세수를 다 진짜 지기 있어요. 텐데 전에 고소 말람 텐데 와라. 마도지 소소케게 맞춰 내가 지지 용 쇼마쇼스 말람 제 야보들 개와 좀들 마도 용해요 말아. 대산지 좀 된 데랑 그 송구도 와. 집에 송을 쫓지람 내내 기자 남을 땡세. 코에 동에 장마 쫓지 남가 등에 결혼도 땡이 다서 무슨도 캔네. 랑게 냠요 주네. 세네. 집에 송을 쫓지람 내내 기자 남을 땡세. 대신식 받던 바에서 산지에 아니 랭게스네면도 교조를 따도 쳐야 돼. 가를 랭게 가르스나. 대신식 뭐 랍자 떠야 돼. 그 대체는 대부분이 연구를 대체는 대체 마신 대체서 라더진에 떠야 되라. 랑게 세신 냠수녀 하나씩. 집에서 뭐 주제람 내니 기자나면 대신식 받던 바에서 산지 좀 되게 랭게스네면도 좋나야 돼. 교조가 랍자 쳐야 돼. 그래서 쳐야 돼. 기자 남자 자고서 어디 유도 소소서 두고 그래다 송거도 어디 인데 소소 개침 부위에 버도 마송고 얼마도 어디 가서 알아서 몰람 잡산데 아니 거기 차리 버체 가서 양아지 두고 쳤는데 당연히 엄마라 뒤지게 이제 제가 보이면 루션다에 근데 용해시 와도 어디 지금이야.
So here, although Buddhists assert that the Buddha is the ultimate final refuge, it isn't as though the Buddha is like a creator that gives us good and bad. We make kind of prayers to the Buddha in the sense of when we have done something that is good, we sort of put that forth and rejoice in it. Or if we have done something that is wrong, we confess that, like, oh, I didn't do this well. But it isn't as though the Buddha is like the one giving us good and bad, or really we need to recognize that the Buddha is the ultimate refuge in the sense of having taught unmistakably the points of to be adopted and to be abandoned. The Buddha doesn't can't give us something by our praying to him, but rather is the refuge in the sense of being the one that taught these various points. And so there is a verse that says that I have taught the path for the extinction of suffering. And so that is like the Tathagata that is the supreme teacher in the sense of based upon his own direct experience, his own realizations. He then turned and taught to others the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned. His primary activity is then the teaching of that to others. And so we as individuals are important. It's not like other traditions wherein there is a creator God that sort of hands these things over, but rather it is in your own hands. The Buddha, based upon his experience, has given that kind of path, has taught the path for the extinction of suffering, for the removal of suffering. But we ourselves have to do that. That is, we as individuals are important, and we need to take responsibility for our own actions.
뭐야? 어디 근데 그 교도소야 강가 개화이나 개화지들 대부 강가 영화요 말아. 개화이나 소소소 그 대부 로스로스요라. 어디 가서라. 당에 중국에서도 지시하는 그지 말해. 어디네. 아마도 되게 대서치요. 경할 때도 쓰기다. 아니 대체돼야 ngazu rokwa yang shenda kishila yore. Eti member kala che yore. O teacher ni tipajo te chi dege kurachi kasure. Yongya da chi da pingere chungwa de kanga sa shagre sa. Eti ne yang te chumbi che shenda pa mebe so shagre. Ene samsal tanga mes che yang e chi la sha tanga di midus kol kala songe de chi simbe sore ku kidu yesara ka ka tenya ko dange de ka ka che tanga mes ya simbe se de tene rogwa che de se te che de so so ye de putu nya ya bu che nya ni se da tapsi che go ma de ti te sa ti chi se pi go ma de so so alen danga che so so che che ne se da pe la so ne se da se love you. Tini chi de love you. Oh, kang ba ya wo ma de. Kang ba nga zu shi kyo jo yi be ka so de. Zhen jin je de ye chi de. Kang ge ji bu ne ka na ko shi ge zhen shi ya kang ba chi ya wo ma de. Ni kyo ba chen bu chi zu che tu de. Ani ko ge la wo de an tang an de cha chun bi de ti ma chen nga de ni ja de kyo an de le de chi lang so a se. Kyo a chi ma kang ba de kang ge mi le ya bu chi lang ya ta mo lam pya gu chi yu si la de. Tene kogla chidgla a kyokugwa chibatane lonje yongir mata chibatane kera milu topgu marese milu topgu yena chutim songu rese mige wacho de pa ke wacho de trose chibatane kera lonje chambu yo chamate lonje yo kyur mata ke milu toye kyude chutim songu mata chibatane kera milu topgu mardas ko sheshe dang taba 내가 말라 텐데 말라 거라 이시어데 다샤스 마르마르 게 라고리야 제코 국바시데 어디서리 저 다가슬라요 트네 야 제질랍다
So here, just to tell a little story, there again, like the causes that we create will lead to certain results, and the virtues that we create, they have particular kind of causes. So here, there was a place where we were staying in India, and there was one Geshe, and then another teacher, I believe of like a Hindu teacher, that was always making these kinds of offerings, like making really generous offerings with the kind of food and things that he had. And, you know, eventually he like sort of gave, was always giving everything away. And so the Geshe was saying to him, well, you need to like leave enough so that you have something. You can't just always like expect to give all of this stuff away and then be able to, like, you need to have enough for yourself right now and can't just always be giving it all away. And so this teacher also had kind of a bad foot. He had an injured foot in this life. And he was saying that, well, I'm making all of these kinds of offerings in order that in my future life, I'm going to be born as a human with a good foot, with a good kind of a body. So I'm doing this with this sort of intention of being able to have such a body in the future. And this Geshe thought, well, this is really stupid. I need to explain to him that it isn't through generosity that you get a human rebirth, but rather it is through guarding ethical conduct, through practicing the 10, avoiding the 10 non-virtues and engaging in virtuous, actions that one is able to. It's not through generosity that we ensure that we have a good rebirth in the future. And so, this Geshe wanted to tell him that. And on the one hand, it's like, well, he has faith in that what he is doing in terms of generosity is going to lead to that particular result of a human rebirth. But this other Geshe was saying, well, he needs to know this because he's doing something that, although it is virtuous, and engaging in generosity leads us to having material wealth in a future life. He should be aware that that's not the kind of practice that is going to ensure that he has a good rebirth in the future. So here, when it comes to the kind of causes that we create, they have particular results that come about from those particular causes.
Oh yeah. Oh they did do. Oh they did cause ngajo shungunale sungudo. Chimbe lonje se. Chimba tongale tane kare yungure sene te debutila lonje chimba yungure se gora. Oh sena cheche mata to station ko chima kyo che 이다다 드레키레세 디 롱전이 현달 심바타게네 디 데부들라 마오바나 소소 롱주 심부 연구레세 세그 내면에 소베 풍부매바 라 밀리케베이나 어디 디주레세라 심베 롱주세라 팀기 대에세 샹라 차와 메게와 줄라 소바 빵 딘도서 개와 줄디 주게나 메게와 줄디 파 차방바데 주디 당하준 대세네 슈슈도 지만 셰도와 어떤다 어디 샹라 차와 빵에 추좀 송구이나 메게와 줄라 소베 추좀디 송구이나 또 메게와 줄디래 단다 어디 가서라 추좀 송구이나 아니 라다미 겨와상부터 부르지 집에 놓주 팀기 됐어 팀 손에 댄줄 시기라 수좀 gamba셔지 미거 주도 사는 댄줄 견도라 어디 그랬잖아 집에 놓주 팀기 됐어 수배 당대에서 수배 공개나 아니 코드 차고 싶다 지나 그 특별한 수도 미 통면도 쉬이 kin들 기거래 통면도 같은데 수배 공부에 미 당다된 봐 동인도 그 미야 따나 따대보 가서래 통대보 어떤 데그 부티 기거라 당다된 봐 시발로지 팀데 수배 당대 준비 시스 겨울에 준비 전부 여봐이나 아니 시지 전부 기거라 미 시지 전부 산다면다 시발로지 팀데 수배는 준비 삼대 기시스 띵이제도 공부에나 셈 남도 마보 진남이 용게도 바시는 셈 템포 용거라 삼대 기시스 가르시고에서는 그거다 어다 또 몽바다 또 바시는 셈 템포 체제 수수 삼로 가르당기네 데이터 따다시 땅 통계 제가 그래서 삼대 기시스 로이트스 시레블 장바치기나 랑도르니네 동업이 내수다 가리인바다 자주 가리네고 시레지 딱제세요라 되게 많이 받아 파 인바데 중원에도 시에서나 시와도 그러한 녀몽바다 메시바 몽바다 저절 때네 저절 간가 시와도 그러와 메시바 몽바다 자와도 그러라 시럽 제게네도 로이 저르스자라 진짜 그 소소소 규단 게도서 소소소 로가요 봐 대선다 대던달 대공화지도자 대토배 줄래 주지 대토배 줄래 주지 방어거든 마도 시디 강갈 방어에서는 대레드에서 말와 어디 럽시냐
So here, when it comes to, we see in the Buddhist texts this explanation of the way in which particular causes lead to different disparate results. So for example, generosity leads to wealth. We shouldn't be sort of stingy or miserly with our possessions because if we are generous, that will lead to our having what we need in terms of food and clothing and necessities in our future life. We won't be born in a situation in which we are impoverished, we are bereft of those kinds of necessities. And so then it is said that happiness comes through ethical conduct. So by abandoning the 10 non-virtues, by engaging in virtuous conduct, by abandoning harming others, if we stop harming others, if we primarily here abandon the 10 non-virtues, it is through that kind of ethical conduct that we are able to ensure that we will be born in the happier migrations. That is the kind of foundation for that. And then we have patience. Patience leads to having a kind of radiance or being pleasant in appearance to others. When we are angry all of the time, that results in having a form that others don't like to look at, that is kind of unpleasant to other sentient beings, that's off-putting. Whereas when we engage in patience, we take on a form that is really pleasant for others to look at. And our joyous effort leads us to having a kind of splendor in our future lives. And so too, through the practice of meditative concentration, engaging in meditative concentration helps to eliminate the kinds of distractions of mind. And so practicing that leads in the future to having a stable, peaceful mind that is more pacified from our various afflictive emotions or from desire, excitement, wherein the mind gets drawn to desired objects objects. We have a more pacified mind in the sense of not getting so distracted all over the place. And so too, wisdom leads us to freedom. It is through the development, the increase and the enhancement of our wisdom, of understanding the kind of roots of our various afflictions and eliminating them through our wisdom, that we are able to attain peace. And so it is through the development of all of these various causes, through engaging in the practice of the six perfections, that we can have a sort of well-rounded, good rebirth in the future. And so again, this is illustrating that each kind of virtue has its particular result, that we can't, I mean, we engage in those practices and dedicate that merit towards that kind of a goal, but it's not as though we can just engage in whatever and try to dedicate it towards a particular result, because each virtue, each positive or negative action that we have is going to result in a particular kind of effect. It's not as though we can just say, oh, I want this to become this, or dedicate it in that way, and it will become that, but rather there is a kind of a concordance between the cause and result.
Oh, yes, I do. Oh, yes, that's on the Kasura. Oh, Tambu de la Rava, Shala Tse, make you a chutipa. The end of Sogi Kiwachuti, Niri Messina Tune. Lunga Yesum Binanera, Geshe Yeshe Nata, Samatan Nata, Shalamli Nata, what is Kabati Levichagora. Make you a chulidroma to Samatan Gitache, make you a chupan, Kiwachu. Dilatane, Kiwachima, Fatami, Chutu, Betan, Kabar changing about the Toba chicken some. Sendele, nearing your medicinal, Samutana, Koyada, Duisera. Nazugetona, Mavis, you share, and Coaching, Kazation, and Yamanashi, Tete, Matomado. Nearing your medicinal. Chisona, Geshe Yeshe, and the legislature that in a carcass, Mantala, near Chipsha, Retana, Pepengora. Nema Katambe Kishito, Otinde Soda. Togyapse Susitin Karicho Sostilich, and your done, but Uchili Toga Mavichavera, Mikiwa Toga Mavichavera. But in the Nevato, yes, all my Jaloshi Mekuba, Satami, Joy Cheversi, Top Tiambe, Yaru, Sitine, Tendunet, Tenduya, Cutia, Dress, Tendris to Gusam, and the Mikiwa Shungar Sabal and Josimse. Sendilia Tito Jana. And the coach Joachimang son Medroata Lata Milky Pacific Susula Lavalier Surgery de Vara. Oh, the lead and Debusa Chana and Jackie Omara Teganesi. To the Chinekangi Juice and Jackie Omara. What in the day? Milky Caberson Kimanam Joachimanam Tobachinsa. There's a mind by Lata Milky Joatia. Tungiranshis, and Tizam the Choshim, this Shison. Take on the other lot of American Kutungiranshis, Basam. Take a natural so me to me some taro, or to some tani. That teletaro chicheku to some. Let a Yomobe Shawan the Juni, Roy, and the Kishi Chamber. Pumbu don't let Chamber Taro chicheku to some. Tabato cheku do some. Or teach it to any Yomopangura. Now something ganzi the shoe to tire. Any control tanga get and trato and symptom you could trato or Tezukanga, new tire. Oh, condition any Tabatova Chegusam. Rachi Butabatova Maimba. Pamaki Simja and Sosolia. Situm Yebera. Ah, Tini. Droputomo Sobakari, and I put to some Tamjele. Rockmacher to get Chegure, some Sosochigo Sound Tandem. Simja Tamja Marshable Soba Samta. Simja Tamja get to Tunge. Simja Tamja Tarbalia, Gobalia, Soso Robache Tunge. Oh, Tindajil Juachagin some. They said to Tanda only never Yomar, never can ever take a chino can you send the Pemba to it and saw Paneta, Tindajera. And the Rimji Pemba Tartuba, never also sober corner. Shana Pemba to it and never Panya, Tepsi to get a Sanjera. Kianko and then could to the Rani. Nembagi, Tabdi Chai, some Richaki, never some pan, and the Mombe Shaki, Shiragicha, Momba some pane. John Sama said, you and then some Landor Jen, some of them get Tarsimba. Kansa chilan juwa chagin sam, ya sanje kuba toba chagin sinada. O tinde se ngebar do toba chagin sam, kaje ngona ngor, kari ina yin, ti mingli shagura, tarimbu samrata. O tinde se ngebar chagin sam, ta tanda kanga che tuku marida. Tambu ti che tine, ti rimbe rimbe tozo lupgi yin sam. Ti che tu kanga to lup tuku marwa. Nga zo pechana lingu toa. Chitangu jite sheki chanchu tuni kia bata, chanchu simbe la bala, tada rimshin ne bata. Dajan dola pento do chanchu simbe kia jeshi, chanchu simbe la bala, rimbashin dola barki sido. O te kanga tuya yo mara yu su sesi na mandi ra. No, tsangma labgi yeshe, rimbashin dola bgesi. Ti kanzu labda labzon che de abu doa. Nga ime che keba shiba che goyon samgi wara, ABCD labgi wara. Ko rimbashin dola bni ikan do yin sam simshu kia doa, ta che doa. O ti nashi ko samratan wara. O ti ndi sangi je koba chingi ba tobar cha, ti che do, ene umar renji tinga ko she songberwa. Nga do da ngeli tu chigi tabti zula toba che, ti sosu to samratan ra. Samratan ni shensi na ti yana yandu kumdi che, yana yandu kumba che, toba dan samba da kumba. Sum rimji she ne sangi je koba tobar cha, ti che do cho nyingi sam kulun seta ni sembar shosi. O yandi de, mamu che se.
So here right now, while we have this kind of opportunity in this human rebirth, first, what we need to do is abandon harming other sentient beings. We need to take seriously the practice of abandoning the 10 non-virtues and engaging in virtuous actions. This means that how we conduct ourselves on a day-to-day basis when we are in society interacting with others, we need to think about how it is that we act towards them, how we speak, how we think, and actually apply that in our day-to-day life. And so we need to make an effort to get rid of all of those kinds of things that we do in terms of our non-virtuous activities and minds. And this will definitely allow us to attain a rebirth as a human in the future. Now, we tend to sort of disregard this in our daily life. We think like, oh, that's just a small kind of practice. It's not that important. But really, this is the foundation for everything that comes after. And so doing something like really taking account of what we are doing some accounting regarding our various actions, this is something that was recommended and done by the earlier Kadampa masters. So like making a list of what non-virtuous things have I done today. They would sort of make a tally of that. And eventually when we start paying attention to that and tallying those up, doing that kind of accounting, we can get to the point where we're not putting any marks in the non-virtuous category. But this is something that we need to do in terms of our day-to-day living, how we think about others, how we speak to them, how we act towards them. And by doing this kind of accounting, we will be able to improve our conduct, and thereby holding this kind of foundation of abandoning the 10 non-virtues, of engaging in virtuous actions, we can ensure that we get a good rebirth in the future. This also involves recognizing that in previous lives we have engaged in non-virtuous actions, and we need to take the time to confess and purify those kinds of non-virtues that we have done. We can't just make a prayer that this come about. We actually have to do those actions. We have to create those causes. And we come to see at some point that even though, and this is an important foundation to hold our ethical conduct, but even if we are to ensure that we gain a good rebirth again and again, it is something that is really still within the nature of suffering. Being born under the control of karma and our afflictions is something that is a cycle of suffering. And so therefore we look at, well, how would it be? That's not satisfactory to just gain another rebirth as a human or a god, but I really want to strive to get out of being under the control of my karma and afflictions and this cycle of repeated rebirth. And so looking at the causes that lead to us, our grasping at an I, the kind of afflictions, our pride and our jealousy, our competitiveness, our anger, and so forth, and look at our various afflictions, we then try to remove them. We try to engage in the kinds of practices that will lead us to be able to get out of that cycle, to attain definite goodness. And then we think about, well, just to gain liberation for myself alone is really not satisfactory either. All of these sentient beings that are around around me, recognizing that they have been our kind mothers, that that we are sort of interconnected with them and dependent upon their kindness, we then think, well, I need to do something for them as well. Just to gain my own liberation isn't satisfactory, but I need to get to a position where I can be of benefit to them. And we recognize that right now we don't currently have that kind of ability. We aren't in a position wherein we have brought that sort of ability to benefit others to its culmination. We haven't developed fully our compassion or our knowledge or our ability, but recognizing that I myself want to become a Buddha who has removed all faults and developed all good qualities, I'm going to begin by myself developing every good quality that I can and removing every fault that I can in order that I might be able to attain such a state in which I know all of the points of what is to be adopted and what is to be abandoned, and can thereby be of aid and benefit to other sentient beings to help get them out of samsara. And here, this is something that we need to have a kind of long-term view, not thinking that it will be immediate, but thinking however long it may take, I'm going to strive towards that goal. I don't have the ability now. I'm not able to be of full benefit to other sentient beings, but this is something that I'm going to strive towards. And that means sequentially training, as we say when we take up the Bodhisattva vows, that just as the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas of the past gave rise to this attitude of bodhicitta and then engaged in sequence, in stages, in the various trainings of a bodhisattva, so too I am going to train in stages just as they did. And this is the kind of attitude that we need to have, a long-term kind of a view, as well as recognizing that we can't do it all at once, but rather we are going to do this kind of training in stages. Like when you have a student who wants to learn something, they might have really high aspirations for what they want to be able to do with their studies, but they have to begin by learning the alphabet, learning to read and so forth, and train in stages in order to get to that kind of a point. And so here, thinking that even if we are placing our high aspiration to become a Buddha, being who has removed all faults and developed all good qualities, we are going to train in stages, and do so by listening to this advice coming from the precious Garland regarding how to gain happier migrations and definite goodness, in order that we ourselves might be able to take up this advice into training in order to become a Buddha for the benefit of all sentient beings. So let's please set a good motivation here for listening to the teachings.
Oh yeah. 방아지 델레소. 쇼르가 구축군이 들어와.
Nare.
더들 가서라. 더 가서도서나. 학배 뒤니번 내시기도 어디 가르쳐 그랬으나. 얘도 다 란젤에 속고 대주 다 년도 지때네서 그래. 택매 지때는 나를 송배. 덴바시다. 로아니 장조 수준세라. 덴바니 월샤바시 안다 봉아시세 주르지 감바시 온봉아 동가 자주 좀 수준 요라. 냠솔랑자. 대저 냠솔랑바. 깨바만 뭐 냠솔랑 샤기는 산제지 고마 통도로 와서 거라. 택바 심볼 로스 지가와 요래 삼겨라. 다데 건조게 남배 줍다 뭐 켈랭게 되게 터도 택바 숨세데 켈랭 거라. 타르도 택바 숨 년들기 택바 지송거라. 랑제기 택바 장주세베 택바스. 야 퇴진기 택바스. 택매 택바들 니용거도 와. 그래서 산제기 주제 그 삼바당 닝도도 로도블라 뜨네 네 코란츠 때다 텔레템바시 송겨라 냐데 조선 요바치 타바토베르 치세 타바토에 교도 주티디르시 송겨라 했네 제가 들려 텔레 링제 케바칭 이스라 칼레 켐데 켐퉁게 릭트 줄이야 텔레토아스 케바치 송겨라 네 찬주 셈바들 텔레 케시 케바치 티 송겨라 틴도 가서라 나라도 탑승하듯이나고 콜라야부스네 직체 탑시나 탑제도다 잘라도 뒤뒤뒤 전에 제시도 와. 야 딜레 링에 전에 제시 와라. 딜레 계시 개발전에 배시 제시 오그라. 어디나시. 뒤뒤뒤 전에 뭐 다다 좀 세네. 사르나들이야 뭐 트랜스포트 되게 있어라. 어디도서 뒤뒤뒤 제시네 제시다 면도와. 가르치는 쇼고다 그래서 가르는 싱글로 메카데 파지 얘네티 두시도도서 얘네 서비스 메타 티나려 사부수야 티치도 Tinte lo su ting san sar na nima chi tu jin tinte shi do kwa. Mi tsu yo che che ti me ta ani ti na lia ne che me we che khala sa to sho go to che ti che ani ka so da. Tu shi tu shin lo me kal chi. Tu ri re su shin bu re su sa ya he to. Ni me lo se. Se ti na shi chi ne ko chi ri re shi do kwa. O tinte ke du re sum sum go ra. Ti ko be wa ge song ro ma do ka ga ta tu tar tu be te ko sum go ma ri na ta. Tanda konzo karin de was nyande tekbala shune tarba tonate tartu res. Nyande ranje tekbala shune sine tartu res. Chanjo sembe tekbala shune tartu res. Tarin nyangele de ne ro tachum pumul hama mebe nyangele de se sopo mebe chasuna ne shiwe ying le shubo res. Shiwe ying tongbe ying lia shu so re kaga tartu res sam diora. O da te tartu ma res ni bude 킹메 진이부터 괴배왕의 숨샤리 타르토요 말 단다야 태과시빌 함레 슈리아 산지 있고만 통그레서 어디 기지 셔디 온거 알아 어디 질러나 야
So here, then picking up in the text, we are on verse 392, which is talking about how, again, we're under this sort of point of, and this is the second point, under the incompleteness of the paths and fruits of the universal vehicle as explained in the lesser vehicle scriptures. And so here it's asserting that Buddhahood cannot be attained by just practicing the Four Noble Truths and the auxiliaries to enlightenment, like the four applications of mindfulness and the four genuine restraints and the four bases of miraculous power and the five powers and so forth. All of those are in common between the foundational, the fundamental and the universal vehicle, but Buddhahood cannot be attained by just the kinds of teachings that occur and if we split the fundamental vehicle into two, that of the hearer's vehicle and that of the solitary realizers of the Pratyeka Buddha vehicle, these are things that are taught for a particular purpose, right? So there are those who really want the quickest method to be able to attain their own enlightenment, the sort of shortest thing, the least that is necessary in order to get to that kind of a state. And there are those who have a little bit more mental fortitude, are willing to go through a little bit more in order to get to a sort of higher state of enlightenment. And then there are those who are interested in the universal vehicle. So we could think about this in terms of like when you make a meal, someone, you have the various kinds of like ingredients that you're going to use and the sort of various implements in your kitchen that you're going to employ in order to cook that meal. And so maybe you want to make something that's just very quite simple, or maybe you want to make something that's a little bit more extensive, or maybe you want to make like this whole really extensive feast, and thereby you're going to need different kinds of ingredients that go into that. So just to like another little story, there were sort of sages or rishis in Sarnath that would make these very, very simple meals. They actually wouldn't even have any kind of container, but they would use like potatoes and various leaves from trees sort of ground up and make these sort of things that they would eat. And so they had a way of like heating up the potatoes and having sort of ground up these leaves and then making like almost little balls of potatoes. And so they're able to get the kind of food that they need with very little in terms of the ingredients and implements that they need to be able to cook those. And so when we think about these three vehicles, they were taught for a particular purpose, although in each of them it's sort of said that, oh, this is the ultimate vehicle that when one attains either through the hearer's vehicle or the solitary realizer's vehicle, the state of an arhat that they would refer to as being nirvana without remainder. You no longer have a body and you're sort of absorbed into the sphere of peace, that's the final vehicle for that practitioner. And so too for the solitary realizer and also for the Buddha, this is a kind of provisional teaching. They aren't really, those two of the fundamental vehicle are not really the sort of ultimate attainment, but rather eventually eventually they will attain the state of Buddhahood, but they're taught for a particular purpose. There is a reasoning behind teaching these vehicles, and it is for the needs of various disciples.
yeah, 단데 인다 말이야. 박배 템바 시다 장조 수련을 써봐. 개바 마부 공부할 때는 상계 쇼도와 상계도 왔어. 걔도 얘들이 때문에 로서. 등매기 때문에 로서 때까지 때문에 송고야. 메도 아시고 알아. 수저되기도 와. 다들 발렌게 알아. 아니 간도스네 진럽 박배 된된다. 장주 박배 템바시 시거도 템바시 미타스 치도스도. 장주 초대 덴바이 장주 수준세 덴바니와 샤바시 세양다 보아시 세다 들려와라 주주지 감바시 온보가 도마스티 땅가 마gem니 저기래 장주한테 방안을 제시돼 어떠서 시거라 장주 수준시거라 뜻은 없는 데도 와서 람 장주 초대 덴바이 람네 년도 통물에 년도 대관 등맥이 람네 요아 와서 데 티진 데 공산은 데 상계는 터주 특파티 데 공나 타투리 상계도 와서 봐라. 저에 상계 대부 관계 라서 특별한 특파 신배 때는 상계 대부데 관계 학벌에서 나서 년도기 특별히 시고라 특별 신불에 관계 학벌 선거에서 저 시도 필요한데도 택배맨배 트라좀바 상계진 대부 관계 하듯 택배맨배 트라좀바 레스고라 상계진 대부 하고게 말했어. 그래서는 사과 멤버 클래스 상계진 송기 진럽 관계 상계의 최선의 진럽 관계는 얘들다 랑계기 트라좀바 남레슈니 티야 대부 토에도 와서 어디에 더두르 와서 그라 진럽 관계 여러 트라좀바 대부 톱네베 박베 덴바시 콘트 다치메 데부 톱지기 탑 박베 덴바시다 대신메다서 주도 네람 장조 수준을 써봐 계속 공부할 때네 데부 탑도 톱도 와서거나 박베 덴바시 대신메다서 주도다 장조 수준 뭐 잠시 공부하다 데베 람네 년도다 투모와이라 년도다 랑게다 니 장조 서바 강게 공부로 이제 공부할 때는 이름 공부할 때는 상계로 와서거나 투모와라 투모와는 데보 투모 마에바 종아 미세베 저르지 람 공자데 투모와레도 대보 숨가게 아니 장조 선배 대보를 람 공니야 상계서지 데보 학바지 도에 연구 말어 와서거라 그 공자데 직바레도 와서 제거라 세나서 이베처서 다들 봐 얘한테 원이 여기서라 다 순반에서 dire 요 원래 teaching 봐봐
So here, then someone has this kind of qualm that sets up verse 392, in which it says, well, if one were to say that it is merely by sort of through the cultivation of, again, the Four Noble Truths, the 16 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, and the 37 auxiliaries or aids to enlightenment, or harmonies with awakening, the four applications of mindfulness, the four genuine restraints, the four bases of miraculous powers, the five powers, and so forth. If one were to just by meditating on those for three countless eons, so a longer period of time than those others, then wouldn't one attain Buddhahood? So is it not just through the cultivation of those that one attains the state of Buddhahood, although one would meditate on them for three countless eons? So it says then in verse 392, the path that is shared with the hearers includes the foundations for the Arhat, the meanings of the Arya's truths, the Four Noble Truths with their 16 characteristics, and the harmonies with awakening. If Buddhahood were the result of that path, how could Buddhahood be superior to Arhatship? So if it is the case that Buddhas simply meditate on those same causes as they are presented in the fundamental vehicle, well then how could it be that a different result would come about? Here it then asks, by what would the result of Buddhahood be superior to the state of an Arhat? If it is the case, it would follow that Buddhahood would not be superior. If it is the case that a Buddha simply cultivates the same kinds of foundation as it is taught in the fundamental vehicle, again, a meditation on the Four Noble Truths, the 16 aspects, impermanence, and so forth, as well as the 37 harmonies with enlightenment, if it's merely through meditation on those, then it would follow that the cause is common to that of the hearer's vehicle. And if there is a common cause, if it is simply a common cause, then how could the result be something different? It would follow, it's not possible that the result be something different. So there would be no way for the Buddha, the result of Buddhahood, the resulting Buddhahood to be superior if it is merely the case that one is cultivating the same kinds of causes as are cultivated by those who attain arhatship through the fundamental vehicle.
Yeah. 안데리다 숨바세다 디테리도 티징기 데네데 산제리까르 송리바세데리도 subject이다 숨바 티징기 데네데 산제까르 송리그레스티셰도 어디 디카스도스 전주줄라 네베 테세 아 도델레네 까마체세 전주줄라 네베 테라 티과신비테네레 송바 사마데 nyende tene time dene le son yo mare sora kama se ele kare tekwa chele ka che se tiji na le chan ju sembe ne lam nyam so la ja nyera time tene la mebe ni mambo ngo adam lam da de tab gi cha mambo so yo re se yo ni ji chen bo da cha sembe so tiji le ne ka che le se ora tiji ke ba nam ji so se tiji ke ba nam ji tikwa shimbe tene de sanje ji ka yin ba so she se ke len ku de so go re ka re se na nyende ki tene na la mebe ane tab da shirab ji cha mambo ora ta che wa mambo shi tene la so yo re se o ti so da ti sanje ji ka so go re se sa wa ti du to o ta de ba ta wa yi chanju sembe che ba zo wa la ne be te nyende ji dole ne se ra nyende ji dole ne ane ka ma che se chanju sembe che ba yo so zo ba tab da shirab ji ti tab sang ma yo so ba de nyende tene na so yo ma re se ra ka ma che se te ba chimbu la ka che wa ti ji tene na le te so yo re se ra ti so da ke ba nam ji ti ji tene ti ji tene sanje ji ka so wa cha o se kar sung shi se kar kele ku re se ke ma le na ti sung ge di su ne te ne sanje le la ba chi kem be tan ru ra ti me te ne le la be te na le so ye na ka su re ka sa ge le che de ya be sanje ji ko ba ke ku se la do ne tham je pa king ge ne ju je te be be tu tu ni shu thong ge si ta da tende xie yu ran tende xie tabi na ti sanje ma so ne sanje le la ba chi so ba ta do ra ya na de ye de ma de se wa chi ra sim je ta de xie chi ba so so le xie tam je xie ba de xie de le ke ba me ba tende de ye de ma de se wa chi ra tende chung na de ye de ra chung ka bu ra ma da o ti su ya o ti so ya la ne ma de
So then third really gives the response to this, where it says that the universal vehicle scriptures are suitable to be considered by the wise as the word of the Buddha. So here, this then says in verse 393, The subject matter of engaging in practices for awakening is not discussed in the Fundamental Vehicle Sutras, but it is discussed in the Universal Vehicle. Hence, judicious persons should accept the Universal Vehicle. So here, there are many kinds of aspects, particularly of the method side, but also of wisdom, that are taught within the Universal Vehicle scriptures that are not taught in the Fundamental Vehicle related to, say, dedication and prayer, the method side dealing with bodhicitta, this attitude of exchanging self and other, and so forth. And so one should accept that these are the speech of the Buddha, these much more extensive teachings related to wisdom as well as method, because the kinds of complete causes or complete practices that are necessary for attaining perfect enlightenment, for attaining that state of Buddhahood, are not taught within the hearer's vehicle, within those kinds of scriptures, but they are taught within the universal vehicle. So here, when it comes to, like, if it were the case that these kinds of practices, as they are taught in the universal vehicle, were not taught by a Buddha, then one would have to accept that there is some kind of teacher who is superior to a Buddha, because these are kinds of superior practices, things like bodhicitta, exchanging self and other, the more extensive teachings on wisdom and so forth, that lead to this kind of ability to spontaneously and effortlessly benefit sentient beings in accordance with their needs based upon complete knowledge of what is to be adopted and abandoned. And so if it is the case that this is taught, but it's not the teaching of the Buddha, then we would have to accept that there's some sort of teacher that is superior to the Buddha. Or on the other hand, we would have to accept that these things are not good qualities, right? That something like equalizing and exchanging self and other, or this attitude of bodhicitta, is not a good kind of a quality. But look at the result that it leads to. So neither of those are acceptable propositions. So therefore, it is right, it is logical that experts, scholars, should accept that the scriptures of the universal vehicle are the speech of the Buddha.
Oh, yeah. 이거 당연히 됐다, 가서는. 꾸짖고 봐. 다른 가서도서나, 다는 택바 좀 텐데, 가서 년도랑제 택바도 탑도 택바 마이나. 근데 다 좀디 가르쳐는 송거 그래서 거라. 아니 시바 택바. 근데 시바데 되라 가서. 어, 택바 숨송 배고 봐. 되게 뜨외는 배운 게 그래서. 택바 숨송한테 숨바데 탑도 매네야. 뒤져야 림게야. 산계지 택바야 뒤에 했던 달이야. 당번에 뒤송도 로를 춤을 통해라. 로를 로를 대절에 담보 춤주서 언제 매야 안도에 전달 송거래 시거라. 태과 숨송해야 돼. 태과 숨송 배고 받을 거라서 뒤져 림기. 이 탑도 산계지 고방하기 태과 전부를 뒤에 했던 달에서. 야. 뒤가래서 짜와든데라 고주고시. 다주받아 지다부리 이게 침무 롱주다라. 디신 산계 뒤져라 지점 쇠배 최단 된도세. 이글랍두산 담보로 좀 첨부체로 담보로 좀 돼래. 이내 담보로 두산 까까까 ABCD라고라. ABCD라고로 마도 담보네고 나 담보들로 좀 지그시 알라베게 오마라. 디방지 지글랍 디네 애니 디담마데랍 디네 엔디 담마데랍 쳔네 뜬다야 서브르 담보라. 어디나시레스 거라. 다주바다 이글 남게도 좋소라. 이게 중에 남게도 다르고 남게도 좋겠어라. 네. 시다보 이게 침무시 당부 시디 악사수 이게 지요라 아까가 강에서 ABCD 가리는 지요구라. 들으시거라. 이게 침무 로주 따라서. 디스 산제 두절로 지점 서베 최대로서. 다가나시 당부도 롭종데 타르도 롭종 진도 요르데. 당부 ABCD라 그러마도 당부 내가 준비하자스게 요 말아. 디나신 저저디 야 태과스부터 림비야 로에다 로카시 당부 til레다 아니지마 태과침불을 쉬었던다 그래마도 당부네 태과침부터는 로를 쉬면든게 쉬면든게 텐도 맹게 도줄 숨겨 말아 코랑 러서 박수 숨겨라 뒤에서 지시 산제 들자라 지점 쇠배 쉬던다 로이 쇠토바 로리아 콘도 추토바 코치 톱사레 삼사 심슈케 토에 쇠트 숨겨라 해서라 들 다들바다 지다부리 라 당부 이게 침무때 당부 까가강 로도 주보다 대신도 산제 남 두자 아니 통만이네 그러니까 소래 통만이네 똑바까왜 쉬어서 똑바까왜 쉬어도 좋다 탑다 시럽이 차도서 쉬면던 것도 좋냐 당부 레라치 송겨래서 봐라 당분이네 내 까와도 뜬게 말해서 똑바까와 쉬면던 게서 아니 로이도 지금 쇠배 쉬어야 된다 그런 거 가져야지 롤 콩도 쉬던 게 뒤쳐야 게 어려서 대림바 디터린디 서 대림바 컨데레스나 대림바 디터레스 다데 오드 마송고도 야 뒤질람나
Hmm. So here, then we next turn to the fourth point, which is the purpose, the reason for teaching these three vehicles. So one might think, well, if the hearer and the solitary realizer vehicles are not the ultimate vehicle, why are they taught? Well, they are taught to be able to lead disciples in stages in accordance with what they are able to bear, whatever it is that they are able to understand, because it's not suitable to teach someone something that they can't fully grasp or can't get in their mind. And so these are taught with the purpose of being able to eventually lead them to that final vehicle. So here, as it says, in 394, a language teacher will make some students read from a diagram of the alphabet. Likewise, the Buddha taught the Dharma in accordance with his disciples' abilities. So here, a student might have really high goals for their studies, but they have to begin at the beginning. They have to begin by learning the alphabet and then learning how to read, and can eventually pursue higher sorts of studies. But when we begin teaching someone, it's not as though, even if their aspirations are for something much higher, we can't just jump ahead of learning the alphabet. There's no way to do that. And so it's not as though, like, if the student is incapable of actually sort of bearing whatever teaching it is, it's not beneficial to jump ahead to something else. They're not able to handle that. And so the Buddha likewise teaches what is in accordance with the various disciples' mindsets and what they are able to handle. And so it says here that, like, just in the same way that you would first teach someone like a diagram of the letters, you would first teach them an alphabet in order that on that foundation that they can then proceed to read and learn higher and higher sorts of subjects. So too, the Buddha, for his disciples, doesn't first teach them dharmas that are too difficult for them to understand, but rather teaches them dharma that they can handle in accordance with their minds. And so then is leading them sequentially. It doesn't make any sense to teach something that is too difficult for someone to understand, but rather it is important to teach in accordance with what they are actually able to bear, what they can grasp. And that is the way in which the Buddha proceeds to teach. And so this will come in the next verse as well.
오야 나데라 구축공화들의 솔로가 거칠래니 다 저간데 스탬버레스트 리바신도 텐다데 시요라 거칠래니 티발레 넘버도 추천도세 다 당부들이야 티바 샬라 체베 미고 빠이 도달이야 로와 샬라 처와체네 샬라 동에 용구데세 틴데 마레세 아니 처방바티 시요도 거칠래니 어다라 거칠래니 티발레 넘버도 추천도세 티바 미기와 줄라 속바 어때서 바빠야 된다고야 단디나 전에 주주시청의 방송만 보용게 봐 어디지 대중 밀리터에 된다 메시지 교과에 된다 거칠래니 티발레 넘버도 추천도세 아니 거칠 수는 두배치 거칠래니 니된 바세 어저 Tandina, Kachila Sochubala Soba Tibble number dog which the shooting. Nesongi Kyokane, Plata Mi Kyopa, Susemki Chute, and the Tiba Mabu Sangeda, Tindeti in a Tati by such that Tiba Nurutani, Kyoya Shukshurtaya, and the Sochewara. Ngarazo ngone seni tende se pancha dogo yora. Ngazo ti chunju chini ya suchi chera chimare. Ngarazo sama chanju senda tongbanyi de singe tambuda ya drasha rumata. Kaji lene tigbale number doji chete de ese. Kaji lene so chubasa tigbale number dogo chete mbare ese. Tindido. Tena tuje kibu chungi sambachini kaji lase. Kibu chungu se chele tambo shuyege. ABCD chapter oh did tuja kibu chungi sambachena kaje sonam je debu sada mi ko ba tu bar che chido mike wa chu la so ba ya mo de che chu la so ba te so la be te so che ko ya ra che ten do che kaje sonam tu be che kaje la ni ten ba se de ane ka ri do se na 기부 중에 삼바셔 뒤뒤 소하지. 제 두비셔. 다 뒤제 기분 댕기 삼바셔 들라서 거라. 뒤제 기분 댕기 다티 야고지. 네 손에 메게야다 하다 밀게야 봐. 땡드랍 가지 탑소나. 다 하다 밀에 야케나 텔레 동에르세니 타르와토에 삼르도 숙체로 마 장고라. 정해야 되도 담보 간거 자소라. 네 쪼때 담보 미게 와주 바게 와주 주에 쪼체 아니 기분 딩데 장 택바 첨불에 박박사 샤기 제쇼거라. 엔테네 지하고 쇼스는 예버디 쪼어레 제티로고요. 일단 중일 삼바세 그때도시. 다전에 그거죠. 기분 딩게 삼바세 가질라네 고아타다 고아 타치도 방자다 냥데 랑자다 순지 제타데 니레 템바오스 다 치료 여바도 시샤제라 엔티소 야 기분 딩기르시라 테스 땡기르시라 기분 딩기 삼바샤라네 코알라 타치도 방자 내다 냠모바와기 껴와지 랑고 신제들 라다 밀케나 야케르메도섬 야마드에 냐가 요르 동에 마무도 삼사테제 다 딜레야 타에 ton달이아니 타르바토니 줄로 지거라 너 대소리아데 가서 담에다 텐데 용구라 녀모 봐야지도 담바체 코아 타치도 반자다 냐데 타치도 랑자 수제제 타데 니레 템바 돌라스 어찌라면 수제제 타데 세탄다 심담바체네 수제제 셴기 동바시라 또 딩이다 저는 야 치료 여바 시샤체 수다 자다 저는 저 통하는 치료 여바 시샤시시라 디케치라 야 디지라
도데바 낭신.
아
도데바 낭신.
가사
Dodeba.
아
Dodeba angshin.
벌써네
Jumta dodeba wa.
아래도 더 봐래
No, no, no.
어쩌다 뭐도 더 봐서라
No, no, no,
치료 여바 개량이 봐 뭐야
no. No.
암저 저도래 또 세요
Gonda. Um, here, then this is the way in which the Buddha teaches in stages sequentially, and this comes in verse 395. It says, the Dharma he taught to some is for the purpose of stopping negativity. So here, the first kind of Dharma that the Buddha taught is really to abandon harming others, to teach others to abandon the 10 non-virtues, recognizing that those kinds of harmful actions cause suffering for others, and that should be avoided. And to some, it is aimed at the practice of virtue. So first, the Buddha taught the kind of Dharma like this abandonment of the 10 non-virtues and engaging in the 16 causes for happier migrations, as we saw taught earlier, in order to be able to gain a good migration, to stop that path to lower rebirths. And so for those who are particularly engaged in lots of non-virtuous negative actions, he first taught a Dharma in order to stop them from that, to stop them from doing non-virtues like killing and so forth. And so this kind kind of teaching for those disciples of the being of small scope is really in order that they might be able to achieve the result of a meritorious result of a rebirth as a human or a god. And so this is something that we need to recognize we can really do, right? We are able to abandon the 10 non-virtues and engage in this kind of practice, but we all think like, well, but I don't want to do that. I want to go to the higher sorts of things. Like I'm just going to go to bodhicitta and emptiness, those sorts of upper practices. But really, again, stopping negativity and accumulating virtue is like learning the alphabet. Engaging in these 16 dharmas that ensure we gain a good rebirth is the foundation for everything else that comes later. When that foundation is then solidly laid, one can engage in the kind of teachings for the middling scope. And so here, to a certain extent, we can learn the kind of entirety of the path. We can see about, we can sort of learn about bodhicitta and emptiness and renunciation and lay imprints down for those types of teachings. But really what we need to practice is this first foundational level of abandoning non-virtues and engaging in virtues. And then for some whose thought is of the being of middling scope, some disciples, they are taught by the Buddha about the methods for getting out of samsara entirely, and looking at samsara as singly something to be abandoned and nirvana as something that is singly to be adopted or pursued, and thereby teaches in a way that is, as it says in the root verse, and to some he taught one that is based on duality. And so here I was clarifying with Geshe-la where it says that he taught based upon the duality of there being separate apprehendeds and apprehenders that are substantially different. So this is a kind of teaching that is dualistic in terms of asserting external objects as really being out there, as opposed to the kind of mind-only teaching in which there is the kind of emptiness of a duality of subject and object, or apprehended and apprehender. Here, he teaches a selflessness of persons and so forth that is in accordance with the kind of lower tenant schools of the Vaibhashikas and the Sautrantikas that talks about abandoning or abandoning that kind of view of self, but based upon an understanding of fundamentally there being external reality and external objects that exist as different things.
뭐야? 반대로 그소라. 뭐야 다들 같이 란데 님이데 서모쿠티 쟁제바 그러니까 동인인진인부신 전주주바 같이 나와서 어디 가서도서는 두세 같이 란데 송지 제타들에게 동배 셰바 돈담바 두바 때문에 삼삼배 나시리도 치료매 생각이시라 가지라는 손지 제타대 동바스리 치료 매버들 쓰거라 송아 유전 좀 랑좀 참아들 쓰거라 손지 제타대 동바스 치료 매 생각들에 치료 유 생각들이 손지 제타대로 송아스리 유속대 들을 잘라서 좀밤 진진게 참아 미신나 실서 그래서 제타대 계획이라 단단하게 제타대 말해서 제생게 동바래서 어디게 저래도 그만두자 뭐 어디들 가질이야쇼 가르 땡그르스나 가질라는 송제 제타대게 동바세 송준이 동기 때 권한이 세 시여라 동이 심담바 시바 돈담도 주베 덤베스 시바데 돈담도 주베스라 심담바시나 치료매 시바 나게 시바 돈담바 주베스 시바 돈담바 주바 덤베 가질라니 님이 된스 송제 제타대니 땡고 엄마래 내로 삼모 뭐볼라 템버르신베 쿠티체 직박게 봐서 다내로 삼모 동반이를 소바테 졸이야 직den게 그 컨셉트 졸아서 거라 땡기 마르테 테소 직박게 봐 동반이 다 동반이다 니지 님부신 라나메바 자주 들어봐 랍도 들어봐 가지러 다 동진이지 님부신 동반이다 닝지 첨부데 동반이 선배권에 닝지 첨부 개셔라. 결에 동니 닝지 닝부 개셔도 다 돈다 대지 우마바 주서 쓰거라. 하여튼 소리가 다 다도 동반이 다 탑시 송대 동니 닝지 닝부 개셔. 닝지 첨부 동반이 또 싫어지. 신배 닝지 첨부야 닝지 첨부 신배 동반이 또 싫어서. 딩니가 참에 공부할 때는 닝지 첨부 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 자주 심지야 돼. 동반이 다 아니 동행이 지금 무슨 라는 거야 다 봐서 자주 자주 주고 원부 랍도 주고 거실에 던데서 어쩌다 어떻게 좋네요 백바 전부 도서세도 엄마 땡겨 왔다
So continuing into verse 96, 396, it says, he taught to some a dharma not based on duality, and to some he taught a profound dharma that terrifies the timid. Its essence is wisdom and compassion, and it is the means to attain awakening or supreme awakening. So here, to some he taught a dharma that is based on that is not based on duality. And so here, this is like the kind of understanding of the mind-only school. So to some disciples, the Buddha taught the kind of emptiness of difference between subject and object, teaching that there are no external objects, no apprehendeds in terms of form and sound, tastes and touch that are external to the mind that is perceiving them. And so the consciousness itself, he taught to be ultimately established. And so this is a kind of dharma that is based, that is not based on duality. So in accordance with the mind-only school kind of understanding, they would say that there are no external objects, no external reality. However, consciousness is ultimately existent, is truly established. And that is the dharma that he taught to some in accordance with their kinds of minds. And then to some, he taught, this kind of dharma that is the subtle mode of abiding, the subtle sort of nature of things that is terrifying to those that gives rise to fear in those that are kind of timid, that are grasping at truly existent things. And this is a kind of dharma that involves emptiness combined with great compassion. So this is really the Madhyamaka kind of a view, the ultimate final sort of teaching, a united method and wisdom, wherein emptiness is held with great compassion and bodhicitta, and in turn, that kind of bodhicitta and great compassion is held by emptiness, that union of method and wisdom. And this is the sort of teaching that leads to the accomplishment of unsurpassed enlightenment. And this is what he taught to those best disciples. Again, this is the kind of teaching of the Madhyamaka, of the understanding of emptiness combined with the essence of compassion.
뭐야 뭐를 뜻이라나 뭐 다던다고 아주 최세도 기부 총무 등이 전부제 방아지 선구도 와 어디나 시제제 단단들 죽다마 도저 죽다마 도대바다 지라마 세라라 등이 지 정매 죽다마 시그라 쟤네 샘잠바 다 엄마바들 대신 죽다마 시그라 어디에 야 가가 지구라 가셔티 중계구도 빼지마구나 년도다 랑제시에 람라 슈팅게 소라 년도지 람라 슈니야 뒤지거라 택매기 가서라 그 택바면 택발에 슈거라 뒤 람라 슈팅게 뒤지거라 년도다 랑제시데 단디 단다 택매기 둘다 마시데 또데 받아 치다 마와트 시거라 어디 teaching to the master, Samsabada, Umama Nidel, teaching to the master. So could today in a Shisungudoa, Zimbabwe Tambula, Residenti Tamas to the Shisungudoa, or to the Koba the Hako Ramada, Sabacheva Mambuora, Doti Bada Chita Bada and the Castle, Samsabada Chidi Yamato, Umabada Chikanga Mambuora. Tesu Kanga, me lot prepare to Dalia. 당분간에 다시 잘못된 실제 송사나 가시게는 고추 가시 고추 말이 요샤라 르바르 지메라 손데 오마 투다디 소소로를 생게데 티심 디타마티시 아니 바즈 티와틀레 용거라 티케라트 되게 말이 지치스 타마디시라 에 소소레 에게 바즈 소바 용거라 티타마디 메드 소바 용거라 나 하콘도라 soba machena riba samlo matana ha koto marwa mi tayari jene mi tengi tengi che che de che yo marwa sante tabshi shidai ba ha ko ro le de ba de sambashi ina tuda ma de chi de shen so ne chi de shen bal pen to yo re ni chi de be zo ba ro tuwa de chi de tama de ya le du go ra paru chi so so tine ya de tama che tuda ma ina ya chi chi le ko ne ko de tuwa tablo du go ra ma do ti soba che de sung do mara这的给什么的？这个就我们就不能用不吧？但是拿去做了，差别是蛮热是，但是来这把的松山住在西的都是松山园了，这个园了发出，这把的这呢，这个旁这个改些，跟这个现在钱的这把做嘛的是个了，但是来这做了，差别是蛮热是，那么这些呢，等于的是，你这些这西，你做的这些园了。世界是内住的这些呢，嘛这南州是呢听的，世界内住了大大的老百姓呢，你夸口有的，世界内住了大大的养不起养大不起差股有的，地等到了呢这内住些股有的，哎的，天住了些不些的，这把来差不是的些嘛的些了，但那个人这把这的什么当个给什么的嘛都，也参照了。控制带那个有了，我觉得，但是来这做了差不多蛮这些，南州去呢等于等下了，西线那最我那的线呢，说是什么的是学校里大大的，你要多说那年末的那个大大的开办多了，你要多的呀，南州去说是没事别忙不了这样，恰当来说吧，什么年吧，你最没听过当个都做了跑这样，这时候人家人买不出来，真的送过来。但是那些做了差不多蛮热是，那么之前呢，等于等是，是吧？没事别忙不来追啊，当牛不来追啊，是的是。学校里大大蛮热的用过了，什么大大蛮热的牛都刚刚去过了。我这里大大的看就学生的用过了，真的马人真的到过来是，的来过了。嘛这那么之前呢，等于那么些吧那是，但这边觉得都得把它知道嘛，的身上把这边觉得。去的吧，对吧？到了那个的话，我的去他们家让人家也是，是吧？真的是现在这买不做这个那个的，真的那给要嘛的事了。先生基本就那也不买事，这现在些什么的，把西装的话，这满地把这是差不多呢，这里讲要嘛的事，那就好搞了。我那次的大学去过了，我那次大学现在也不好搞了。第二个嘛都多给嘛是吧？这块的，反正那么就自己的搞不接不下是都在的是不是这个多？的搞不的都在这个嘛的，搞不的讲那样的，那就是那开始都什么估计就完了，什么是当的搞不接回来嘛都，大概是去跟那个开始这叫个嘛了，的第三节个的开始干做，的那我听不明白，这些老人把当上班做的。这些老人把他上边去，对了，写吧写穷的，上节课了写吧写穷的，写吧写过吧，抄不什么的，你把都大学写过，书那里写上个梦想，他们在现在几乎周边人家教工的嘛，写工匠的，写吧写了，这应当人说什么的，写吧写的那好过了，因为就是什么那么着就是因为什么就是呢，那个嘛了，说了你把你过了，我他忙着是挨了然后。嗯，
So
这算
sometimes, Dixon,
那这
Geshe-la really gets passionate about something and forgets that I need to translate as well. So here, when we explain the Dharma, we often explain in accordance with the various scopes or capacities of beings, the small, middling, and great scope. And so too, when it comes to the various tenant holders, we often explain these in sequence, right? Beginning with the Vaibhashikas and then the Sautrantikas, and then the mind only and the Madhyamaka. Now here we need to make a kind of distinction between those tenant holders of the fundamental vehicle and those who are practitioners of the fundamental vehicle. So when we talk about hearers and solitary realizers, those that are pursuing that particular vehicle, that's referring to those who have taken up that kind of a path and are pursuing that sort of a practice. Whereas the tenant holders of the fundamental vehicle include those of the Vaibhashikas and the Sutra school. We need to understand that that's a different thing from those kinds of practitioners who are striving for their own enlightenment and so forth. And so when it comes to the kind of explanation of the different tenant holders, we need to understand the sort of purpose of this. And this is something wherein we normally study this in a kind of sequence, right? And there's a lot of debate that is involved, debating the various points of, is there external reality, or do things truly exist, and so forth. And this is a process by which we are able to really increase and develop our own wisdom. Engaging in debate is something that happens when we have some kind of an understanding, when we've gained a little bit of understanding of what one tenant school is proposing, and then we move to the next. We can then begin to discuss, well, what is it that actually accords with reality? So discussion comes about in a way that helps us to refine our own understanding, right? And knowing the one tenant school's propositions helps us to then understand what the later tenant schools are proposing and kind of begin to compare them and engage in this kind of debate, really with the purpose of coming to understand the way that things actually are. So here, it is the case that often when one is learning these various tenant schools, you're encouraged to engage in debate about them. And we see that sort of happen. But as Nagarjuna has articulated, engaging in debate isn't just for the sake of debating, right? It's not done out of attachment for debate or attachment to debate. We're not seeking to just defeat the opponent to win for ourselves, but rather this is in pursuit of understanding the nature of reality, to come to a proper understanding of the way that things are. If we're just kind of undergoing or engaging in debate in order to be able to win, right? We're likely to just get angry at the other party and get sort of enraged. But rather, it's not undertaken just for the sake of debate, just out of attachment to wanting to fight with others. But rather, we're really trying to know reality as it is. And the reason that we are trying to know things properly the way that they are is in order to eliminate our deluded ignorance, the kind of confusion that we have that is the source of all of our various afflictions. Our afflictions come about through that kind of improper seeing. When we have that sort of deluded ignorance, we engage in our various afflictions and thereby lead to our sufferings. And so we are doing this kind of process of really intellectually rigorous debate and discussion in order that we come to understand the way that things actually are. It's not as though we are just seeking to defeat the opponent, although we end up damaging some of their assertions. It's not in order to harm them, but again, it comes out of seeking the truth, the way that things actually are. And so to refute others, often we think about that as being something that is bad, but it's not bad if we're doing it out of a pursuit of actual understanding. It's to get closer to that kind of right understanding. And the Buddha has taught these various tenant schools and various levels of teaching to accord with the needs, the level of mind of various disciples. And so most of the teachings that we see within the Buddhist texts are really subjects that we are to engage in with a kind of analytical meditation, right? People's focus is often on placement meditation, but there's very limited teachings that are just about placement meditation. Most all of what we are looking at are things that are to be analyzed, debated, investigating. And it's not as though we can come to a proper understanding if we just read these things and say, oh yeah, that's how it is. We have to engage in our own intellect, and doing debate and discussion around these various points is something that helps us to develop our intellect. So it's not done out of a kind of attachment to argumentation and dispute, but rather out of a purpose of improving our own understanding and coming to that right understanding, which then undermines the various afflictions that are arisen from our wrong seeing.
Oh yeah, what is? Oh, do kasura. Oh, chaba chuyate. Samlatande Chabache Tangamata Shun Chimbeton Mancha Taginga Shine Chakba took in any some to some carine mado, Chabache or Mardo, some sooner tato chet and the Ormado. Shandaganga Chabachen and society and never knew all I wanted to raise some coda. So much and some comarwa. Injires in Barisho says to the Century Mara, carrying my insect. Marazule nebo yora, shibalto, sichi yora, chabacheni, chesi yora. Palanso kuba kuja inani, chabacheka yomara. Sako shabache lab yora. Tito ndala sanje kiti sungudwa. Tingobo uneci ngone de chechu chigwara mata kolne tonda she yomara. Donde ba she shabde de madeside, donde ba kangalia, and zuchu konzo nena samchi kichi yomara. Konzo koti nganzo de yin samete leja gira. 어디 뭐 지지서 버르지 만드나 어디 어디 지금도 왔음 어디 땅마들 주다 땅마들 쇼도다 어디 좀도 대신에 야부도 삼사 땅마들 레도 거라 뒤던다라 시즌에 주제 주시고 맞아 밑들려 견주시고 말아 뒤하고 그래 뒤하고나 제가 생게도 야부이 뭐다 지금 해버시도 근데 손자는 산계게 송구도 산계 송래 제가치 송구도 말해도 산지 좀 되게 나와요. 그거 요산나기 와라. 셴마도 제발 셴메 쇼세. 근데 내가 디디 티티지 손데 강가 이시시. 제발 셴의 록다름 마치 송그라. 디 송그메도 맞아 시럽게 해다 야 지금 줘야지. 네가 지어서 송그 와라. 네가 맹게네 따다가 이시시 다가 샤아스마도 딜라가 셰케 오마라. 어디 손자. 디페케 쳔부레 삼그래. Tisonza sanjege sungda kelno tagam kenem je sekje tawe sershindo lekma tala nga ye kalang harcha ye kushir mense jikdenge sere jinyo na pe noorshini pesagri sam sabso sisi che shibuche tagira sekje tarsikdo se ime pache tup ra melem beda ta ane tole ta sabso sisi che nyogro mato noorshini gulo chigri sam gyora Garazo mezzacil samlutaya tandarachirako, tachu na samtana. Tipe samlutaya tandada normyo sin bambu samlutana, and petola chera to Zimbabwe. The one image samlutse, what is on the kilo dagam kedam, the subject of sessions, Leguata langayekas, Sajek Rimba Mambuson Shatwa, Ima Mambuson Shatwa, today samle wangi kecho tambu tisura. Ti chebe chenani tama di marin dire se soso hako ya chagora. Oh tisuda kyalo daram kene seje tawe seshindo lekbar dala ngaye ka lawar chaye meba am shenje keba jugmeja. Sanje sombare sam meba che inde ingire se tinde samjo amar songda soso gare yima chebe che songora. Oh tire tina shinga tina le yoba kasara. 당연히 농촌에 지면은 뭐들이 가서 동바시와 끼와 매배치시도 동바시와 끼와 매배치시 기 남다 고속들과 동반이 계셔요라 동바시와 끼와 매배치 미시변에 도와줍니다 근데 마시에서 삼로단다 말이니 코요라 네모가가 지고라 미시변에 도와줍니다 대다 투증하고 탑주다 산재 좀 된데 투제와 나왜 탑지 수마부시는 대송거라 riba gyada kene zubar jayase, riba rimba mambo jayase, tabshi mambo jayase, ene kone diya, nesu kone de hako ya liya, tabshi nangudwa. O di kanzu yaku karsura. Nangba ki tata shiki, ene tabde shirab niga liya, 제공 개침부 인섬. 제가 제내니 따들으셔 아서면 내가 고요라. 되지라 안 돼, 그래.
So here, debating is important because, again, we need to learn to think about things and gain ascertainment for ourselves. As I've said, most of the material from the great texts is something that we are to analyze. Yes, there are certain parts that are about developing calm abiding and placement meditation, where we're just staying single-pointedly focused on something. But most of the material are things that we need to think about. And we should recognize that we have the ability to engage in this kind of analysis and debate. It's not like we're an ox or a cow, right? We have the intellect, we have the capacity to be able to analyze and investigate, come to an ascertainment. We shouldn't just sort of think like we read something and we think, oh yeah, that's how it is, or we just make an assumption that yes, that's right. But actually, we look at the various tenant schools and see, well, what is the sutra school saying? What is incorrect about that? And it's based upon not trying to criticize others, but again, we're doing this kind of debate out of a searching for the nature of reality, the way that things are. And so when we sort of find fault with others, it's not out of just wanting to criticize them, but it's out of that kind of pursuit of the way of correct knowledge. And so here, again, the Buddha has talked about the importance of our investigating and analyzing things, repeatedly emphasized this, that we have the ability to develop and increase our knowledge and wisdom. And so we shouldn't and just accept what he says. And so as the famous verse says that monks, O monks, says that you just in the same way that you would analyze gold by cutting and burnishing and rubbing it and so forth, so too should you analyze my speech and not just accept it out of respect for me. And so when it comes to like worldly affairs, if we're going to buy some kind of a gem or we're going to buy gold, we're really careful to investigate and make sure that is what the person selling it says that it is. We don't want to get swindled. We're like really serious. Okay, I need to cut this and burnish this and like put it in fire and make sure that I'm getting actually what this person says I'm buying. And so too, the same way, we shouldn't just say, oh, well, the Buddha said this, so that's how it is. But rather we need to investigate and analyze and really come to a determination based upon using our own logic and reasoning. And then we can kind of have an understanding, but it isn't something that is just to be taken up out of respect for the Buddha. And so too, the Buddha has taught that beings wander, not knowing that things are empty, peaceful, and non-arisen. And so out of compassion, you cause them to enter the path with hundreds of skillful means and principles. So here, the Buddha taught all of these various kinds of ways through skillful means and methods for us to enter the path. And it's something that we have to investigate. It is out of our lack of knowledge that we wander throughout samsara, not understanding the way in which things are empty and peaceful and non-arisen. We talk about the three doors to liberation. And this is something where the Buddha taught all of these things in order to help them enter that path, in order to come to a proper kind of understanding. So when it comes to our development of wisdom, as well as the method side, these are things that we need to analyze and investigate in order that we gain an ascertainment. We're not just approaching it out of a like, oh, this is how it is, this is just assuming, but rather it is through that process of developing our own intellect and really using our critical investigation that we come to a proper understanding and eliminate that kind of ignorance that causes us to wander in samsara. And this is the way in which the Buddha encourages us to approach it. And this is why debating and thinking about things critically is so important.
Oh, yeah, send this. Yeah, what is that? Oh, yeah. Quite a lesson.
Gupchugo dunge,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
dundua.
No, this is that, yeah, yeah. That don't do it, don't do us. Yeah. That don't let you do the carson, the other cable, teaching us. Control on the says us. Oh, teaching it in the Sanjay Kamares. 상계 까면두게 저절에 송겨 시거라 대다르 개베 특징라서 특과 신부 공도야 셰사르와 기선도다 특과 신부 때는 또 상계 까르세 기 상계 까마레 특과 신부 세대는 몇시 마레셔라 어때서 뭐했다고 했지파 내면선 들에 이식기와 지시 삼을도 안 쓰거라 대다르 개베 특징라 공도 안에 세 자신세 속배 chanju trube sir sakwa rabdu tebar chas sanje ji ko ma thoya chi to thpa chimbe tene ne sumbe lam nyam sul la cha to sakbar do nyam sul lan de le teba ke ko de se 속배 chanju trube sir sanje ko ma thoya chi to thab tene shirab thab da kya chimbe tene sumbe tele rabdu tebar chas sakwa rabdu tebar chas te dar kebe tijin ji 피신라 공통 안에 세버리 사시 속배 chanju 주버 차게 치도 학벌업도 때버리 차워서 어디 줄라나
So then turning to verse 397, which is kind of a summary, it then says, hence the wise should cease to despise the universal vehicle, and they should generate special faith so as to attain true, complete awakening. So there are those, again, who don't accept the universal vehicle, who kind of despise it or have anger towards it. And really, those who are wise should give up that kind of anger, but rather give rise to not disparage the kind of universal vehicle, but rather through their analysis generate confidence in that. And then in order to generate Buddhahood, in order to attain Buddhahood, they should, looking at the kind of extensive methods and means, the extensive wisdom side, should generate special faith in that universal vehicle.
뭐야 그것도 있을지라 그것을 뭐야 특별실을 랍대시에서 텔레셰베 쉐바예 특별신비 때문에 송베던다 때도 삼부탄에 때도래 대바게 그래서 때도 상계가 말해서 로타키죠 말해서 텔레셰베 쉐바예 텔레셰베 제세 chanju 쉐바랍 전부만 보여라 때도 예서 아니 라메 chanju top jursense 때도 내신 냠솔랑기나 네 라나 메베 chanju 내랑 chanju 랑게 chanju를 하베 네 대과 전부라는 배 chanju 산제지 고만토 그래서 top jursen 대화 건자 샬라 투스 제신도 아니 쇼레야 때네 chanju 선바 코라도 센텔이나라 셴데 상마탐절이야 대화 내가 대화 투서고 쇼레 투 그래서 대화 건자 샬라 투스 특별 준비 도들 랍도 대신 텔레셰베 냠솔랑시 텔레셰베 또 냠솔랑시 로가 쉐바이 쉐바 파르시베 도들 쉐바이 라나메베 chanju 토번 주시 직된베 대화 그냥서 내가 대화스라 남중간주 치도스라 내가 대화 부수 펜바스라 어디인데고 특별 준비 chanju 선단시 치통나다 소소데 라운드 예여게 소모탐제 대심제 탐제 있던달이야 세와치게 요 말에 폐버바시 두구라 심제 탐제 있던다 중비를 장주 심제 장주 심에 동벌한 차나 개와 추디지 추듬시 개와 가래나 두게로 와마다 내 영어만 주세요 말아 심제 있던다 컨디스 두에 고감 주나 고 두게라 니 추동베 추든데 저번에 봤다마다 되게 저도 강력해 랭겨라 심지에 돈다 마도 삼매게 매라 심지에 돈다 가르 두고 주네 나라저 깔에 강에 소야도 강가고 대화 처르가라 다때야 보천수삼 로침종게 지르더라 나저 깔에 소가라 나라저 깔에 소사디 용에 매버를 삼겨라 이날 밀로서에도 장벌이나 세매버를 놔야라 로 탑기차 상부차 상부 탈시바 시력 탈시바 줄줄하라 어야 뒤질랍나.
So then in verse 398, it reads, through faith in the universal vehicle and by the practices stated therein, one will attain unexcelled awakening and all kinds of joy along the way. So here, one should not generate this kind of wrong view toward the universal vehicle, but rather should have faith in this vehicle that is superior to that of the hearers and solitary realizers. This is a kind of vehicle, the practice of which, the practices that are explained therein, leads to that state of unexcelled awakening. And here one should have an understanding, a kind of faith in this, the practices that are stated therein being the 6 perfections and so forth, recognizing that by doing this kind of practice, one attains temporary sort of happiness as well as long-term benefit. We often talk about the sort of happiness in the short term or temporary happiness and benefit in the long term. And so here, this is something that by engaging in these kinds of practices by the wayside, we achieve a sort of happiness and are creating the causes for a long-term kind of a benefit. And so this is something where we should engage in this practice, the practices of bodhisattvas, particularly that of ethical conduct. I mean, not only refraining from harm, but also doing whatever it is that is beneficial to others. So we have the 3 kinds of ethical conduct, refraining from non-virtues, accumulating virtues, and the kind of ethics that works for the benefit of others. And so we should have this kind of determination to engage in whatever sort of positive activity, gather as many positive activities as we possibly can. And we should engage in the kind of ethics of working for the benefit of others, right? When we make an effort towards something that we think is going to benefit ourselves, generally, it doesn't seem so difficult, right? We know that there's a benefit there, but we should expand that to include all sentient beings. And this is something where it is achievable because of the kind of nature of our mind, that it can expand limitlessly, that we have the potential within our mind to really improve and develop both the method and that wisdom side to a limitless kind of a degree. And so one should give rise to a special kind of respect for the teachings of the universal vehicle, and even more than that, really take up those practices ourselves. Dixon.
Tēne jinda chutim dāngsada, sūbē chūni kēbar dō, kimba lā shē, nīji yī, nīngbū chēn tē, tēn kum zō sē, o tē rō shā, tōndā tū shā na, kār sōng dō sā na. Tēne jinda chutim dāngsada, jinsō pārū chīmba chūgā nā nē, chīmba dā chutim chē sūbē sōng bū tē sī yō rā. Tēne jinda chutim dāngsada, sūbē chūni kēbar dō tē sōng bū tē, lakbar dō sī gō rā. Kimba lā shē, nīngjī yī, nīngbū shēn tē tēn kum zō sā. Kimba chāng chū sāmbā tā, kimba tsō liyā, anē tsō chī shē yō sōng gō rā. Tē kā rē sī nē, kimba tsō gō tē chū lē lā rē sī gō rā. Rab dō chūng wā lā tē mē rē sī gō mā, rab dō chūng wā lā kimba lā rē, tē ndē kē chī kā mā rē sī gō rā. Kimba tsō gō tē chū lē lā rē, chīmbā tā yā tē, ko long chū sā yā tā tēndē bē chū chē yō rā. Tā ngē mē lō sō chā nē rab dō chūng wā chū shī rā long chū sā yā, mē bē kī chī chī tī sī yō rā. Kā sō rē. Kimba lā shē, kā rō sō, chīndā, chīmbā tā yā tē. Tē sō tā sāng kē chōm tēn tē kē kia gāl tē chī tē, ku rā kē bē sē yī na, shēng sāng kē tsā tē yī na tsō wā tē jī, kē bū pū kē nāng lī yā, ku shō tī chī shū sā na, kāngā kālē chē mē bē chē shū chō gā rā. Tē nā kū mē tuwa, kāntē nē kō kimba lā pē chē. Tē tū tē nā nā pē mē chō chī lō tō yā tē kā bū yā sā rā, tē sā nā mē tā chā. Nā lō nā lē tā tē mā tō chī lō shī tā tō chū chū yī sā rā. Tē chī tō nā lē pē chō sō nyam lō gu tuwa. Nē lāp chā kī gu tuwa, chō tē lē yu nā chē kāngā yu gu tuwa. Chō sē lē pē nē, tō tē yā bū chō gu tuwa. Tē ngā chō pē kē nā chū mē tuwa mā tō. 동세 줄편에는 가르가 주어 총을 납세 가르가르 나가리 상마에 좀 신고도 뒤에 가서래 콘도 그거 요구도 소념피 아니 소념시 참잘래 단지시야 참잘 주어시네 야 납세 나한테 지데 근데 그거 왜 했던다 그래도 미망보다 지조던 저요 선남준 저 메시지 저시 근데 지도 그래도 제가 심부데 콘도 롱주 사이에다 뒤에서 피엘라고 그래서 와라 지금 미국에 주디 콘도 개 전부 남기 지도날 깨져셔야 돼 미망보 저어라 rabdo chunga raji ni kumda sin shita dhawa chaya se kaya marwa shu shesa shesa de su su sunyum di su na yana kom chaya re yana chu shaya ra yana punga samde ki chawali shu na dharwa yana chu shaya la soba ti ma to laya kaya mara ti di ku shita ge shanda kondru ta ti de longge de shita nyunga de chiyo kura jinda chudim se zambi gewa chu tu su kundu sung tu kuri laya la kuri sara 진짜 주도 서버 고매돼. 대자 마무리 지도 마무리도 진짜면서 영어라. 뒤도 국가 마요라. 네 서버 고매돼 내라라. 띵이제 공고를 시럽티 창장 적으로 쓰네 또서 뒤주 연계인데 럽도 좋아서 뒤주 여자 고 뒤돌아. 신의 주변에 신의 짱짱 돌봐 깔래 겹쟁이라. 로. 아니 지 가동 공비나 가르 공비나 시기돌봐 슈캠 마무 뒤주 요라. 예멜로 설치내다. 근데 다 등산 그것도 좀 망했지요라. 근데 진짜 주된 서버서부터 김발에 쪼치는 송배에서 건도 줍래라 그래서 띵이제 꾸며다 지신에 주에다 대서 되지 마음부터 거라 건도 나글래가 세버려 신 마음부터가 세요라 서신 따위에 가는 시대 대용해요 말와 되게 송부터 힘들을 것이 진짜 주된 내 가르치도 진짜 주된 말에 침뱉다 주된 다시라 니니 진다 주된 다 하셔 소배주는 개발도 없이라 네 김발라시 인지에 인부제 그 땡금 줘서 저기 sombute나 때 냠래네 때 마부 되고라 심바들로 심바 마부 와라 뒤에 가르쳐도서는 게실라 네 백업 되네서 다단다디 개부체 니 게실라 네 백업 되리야 텐데 저거에서 게시데 미케와 차이나 마도 미소체 다텐데 밀 소체나 마도 게시 송미토베 텐데 레서나 이니 가르쳐서 게실로 당고를 sonso 단로서 그나 미세 마 개베시네 단 도도 메베시나 제가 용어만 두스 게실로 다셔버려 게시고 쇼나 육셔버려라 티 멤버시야 그걸로 다 가르쳐나 미케와 차이나 마도 게시자 메도 삼사 네버메나 아니 럽도 존이하고 그래서 그거라 럽도 존에 제동을 제 근데 교화들 럽지 못해 버시 디고도 싸먹어 보라 저 치마 요에 디고도 소소로 요에는 시치겨라 말아서도 직전에 세르지라 지 형녀야 예셰시 말 개범에 삼사를 땡기도 건조 원에라 앞에 교황아마다 치마도 소소 친디 디도 원에라 찍어라 아마 그때 치부체 그때 치부체 마음바 용기도 소소 때도 때도 다때 개심을 임베시 간도스시나 뭐야 개발도 세 김발라 셰닝지 닝부젠데 땡금 주스 또 세월의 시송도 와 심바다 얘네 이러와 샤발의 시송거라 지금 소에도 가고 세월의 시송도 와 원래 동해 연구를 늘 말해서 잠진이 날도 누가 알았던다 닝지 침벌의 시송고 산게 땜바 닝지 랍도 치와 임베 송도 와 자고 샤바다 닝지 송던데 대송부대 김발라 셰닝지 닝부젠데 땡금 줘서 어쩌려야 땡도네 공부 줘서래 다 저와도 놓고는 계실라 내가 배 갑자기 침바다 침바다 말을 계실라 내배 갑들이다 개보이네 가리네 계실라 내배 갑들이시거라 데리네 침바다 개니다 아니 얘네지 주림다 세배 슈니 개발도 김바 남로 둘라웨 김발에 쉐바 일라세 진소 추스면 대다 패모치 때어르시베 김바 남로 소스 김바 남로 추스면 돼 somde 소진 som고 있어라 김바 추름다 쉐바 som부대 진소 추스면 대다 패모치 때어르시베 김바 남로 가서 오마 주고 거시고다 김발에 소베 추스면 단대더라 진소 추스면 대다 패모치 때어르시베 김바 남로 가서 김바 남로 최동안 돼 건축 쪽에 대 둘라와다 어디 진송도 어레세라 니카르다 게실라 네베 갑티르네 침바다 게니다 니네게 추림다 쇠베촌에 개발도 김베 둘라웨 김바남라 쉐바 일라 개발도 쉐바네 다 김바 남게 개발 둘라르세 가르시르선 럽도 총알라 라버탄바 마이게세 어텔레 라바 컨트롤요레세 텐데케세게 마레세 강가 요초라 라버탄바 마이게세 김베 주근하네 진서 바로 뭐 주근하네 대성 둘라와 이노세 고갑이와라 주베가 퍼시 땅보 숨세 이진ing부제티 템바라 공바르 조이체 바워서 땅보 숨부티 침바치르 서버데 이진ing부제 닝질 시스톤이 거라 잡아다 닝질이야 어디 텔레 공바체 버레세 시바 야 티치구나 저기도 와라
Y- Here, then we have in 399 another sort of summary where it says a dharma, in essence, compassion, consisting of generosity, ethical conduct, and fortitude, was taught especially for householders. You should resolutely internalize it. So here, when it comes to among the practices of the six perfections, this is something that the first three of these are taught as being particularly good practices or easier sorts of practices for those who are householders. We can have bodhisattvas who are leading a kind of householder life. And it's not that they don't need to do the other of the perfections, but this is something that, again, is particularly beneficial for those who are leading that type of a life. So the Buddha, for example, even though he was born as the son of a king, renounced that and went on this path in which he had given all of that up and rather went begging from house to house, receiving alms. And so the householders that supported those who are monastics, this is an important practice for them to be able to engage in by giving alms. And there were some at that time in society that probably couldn't go out as much in society. For example, women didn't have as much of a role in public society. But by going from village to village and giving and receiving alms, this gives those householders an opportunity to make those kinds of offerings, as well as make a connection with the Buddha and even engage in some kinds of dialogues during the process of that generosity. So here, when we are active in society, so living as householders, it is important that we really hold to the practice of these first three perfections, engaging in generosity, holding to ethical conduct. As I've said many times, this is something that is important in terms of how we interact with others in our day-to-day life, as well as having patience, right? When you are out in the world and you have to interact with others, having that kind of patience is particularly important. And again, it's not as though these are not practices that need to be done by those who are ordained as well, but it is easier for when you're ordained and you've decided to set aside the kind of working life and so forth and pursue doing lots of meditation and other kinds of practices. This is something that withdraws you from society to a certain extent. But householders, they have to work, they have to be able to support themselves. And so when it is the case that you are a household householder, you are someone who is interacting with those that are, with others in society. You have to do work, you have to engage in that kind of world, then it is easier to really take up the practice of generosity, ethical conduct, and patience. Here, this generosity has been praised many times, and this is something that kings, when you have a certain amount of wealth, particularly, you are able to do those sorts of things. Now, here, he does also mention, it will come in the next verse, but if it is the case that a king feels that while ruling, all he does is something that is non-virtuous, like that he is being forced to engage in war, or be a leader whose ethics are questionable, is not engaging in good, proper conduct, then Nagarjuna says, well, then give it up. If your kingship involves only doing non-virtuous actions, then give that up and go and become ordained. And so if you think that this is something that your actions are only going to lead to suffering in the future, then it matters what you are doing now. And so really, even as householders, we again will experience the result of the actions that we create. And if we are creating actions that are only going to lead to suffering, then maybe it's better that we renounce that sort of a life. And so if where you go will matter, right? Like if we think about the kind of life that we have now, it is something that is based upon the actions that we have created in the past, and where we are going, what kind of suffering and happiness we will experience in the future is based upon what we are doing now. And when we really have a recognition of that, then what we are doing now is important. It matters what we will experience in the future, so it matters what we are doing right now. And so really the basis of all of this, as it says, a dharma, in essence, compassion. Love or compassion is the basis for all of this. Ethics is based upon our kind of compassion for other sentient beings. I mean, in all of the higher practices, such as great compassion and bodhicitta, even emptiness, is based upon having that foundation of love. And so it is easier for householders, however, and there's a verse within Chandrakirti's Entry to the Middle Way where he also states this, that in particular the first three of the perfections, generosity, ethics, and patience, are particularly praised for householders. It's easier for the householder to practice them, and they have the kind of opportunity to do so. And these are really based, as it says in this verse, on this essence, this foundation of love and compassion. Our ethics, our being generous and so forth, is based upon having a kind of love for other sentient beings, a wish for them to be free from suffering. And this is the kind of practice that one should resolutely internalize.
Oh yeah, 단디 내셔너라. 야, 뭐 단디 로셔나. 야, 어디서? 단디 로셔이다 말 그래. 시바 개베 근저 개발이 로 메뉴나 럽도 좀 담바스. 다 개보게 개 개보체네 때네 근저 개발이 처음 매버체. 미마카리에 술에 처음 매버체. 심지어 마당하체 계속 향고라. 근데 멤버즈 저와체는 마도 탑시메 게레 차스나 근데 럽도 좀 가그리 있잖아. 계속 땅제. 어디다 다들. 근데 지대 미술진 지대 미스 때 정보만 보여라. 신부성경만 보여라. 가르쳐라. 진실로 야부체는 무성경만 보여라. 뒤에는 저와체는 마도 라마게 차스나 요소세를 럽도 좀 쇼세. 최제 계시 니 까나서 최단 준비 계시 경합이나 저와체고이나 아니 요소. Tena chödang chakden dosu chödang jikden ji chakden kyo rabdu chungwa tsu xie sikora. Oya, adi rende jikden misunbe chir so chöba so chuku tato liya pantuya meba tendo chakden na sikora. Ane shiji kanda shiji nyembe chakwe wata chö chiya da ane nyendra yuwa tenda soso rabdu chungwa ya shiri sikora. No risko se. 대천대 내세 다디마도 되게 아니 우마름부치 주된 바데 되게도 름부치 청와래 개베 주된 바데 리우시바오시 어디 줄랍신데
So then here, just to read the last verse of this chapter, it then is under the topic of advice to become a monastic if unable to learn the special royal ways, or really if one is not able to rule in a way that avoids a foundation of harmfulness. So here it says then, however, if you are unable to rule in accord with Dharma, because the world is opposed to Dharma, then for the sake of Dharma and glory, it makes sense for you to become a monastic. So here, if it's not the case that, if you can rule in a way that accords with Dharma, that is based upon ethics and non-harm, then that's wonderful. However, if you're not able to, because of the numerous sorts of unruly beings and difficulties that come with being the leader, being in that kind of position of ruling, and you can't avoid engaging in actions that are harsh, like killing and so forth, then it's better to abandon that kingly life and become a monastic, really for it says here for the purpose of renown, but also really in order to be able to pursue the Dharma. So if one is unable to abandon the kinds of activities that would lead to harming others in the course of ruling one's kingdom, then better to renounce that and become a monastic. And so here then it says, ending this chapter, the meaning of the title, or the title of the chapter, is Royal Policy, the fourth chapter here in the Precious Garland of Nagarjuna.
Oh yeah, brothers.
So we will stop there for today.
No.
It's a very nice verse to end on. So again, for people online, just to note that we will not have class on July 6 or 13, but we will begin again with Geshe on July 20. And we'll finish with some dedication prayers today.
May
Thank
the
you, Geshe.
spiritual teachers lead me on the sacred path, and all spiritual friends who practice it have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispel the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Iram Guru Randa Mandala Kamniryatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.